Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going deep on large language models,
LLMs.
LLMs, yeah, and specifically a new security angle on these LLMs
Mm.
that's emerging, and we're calling it prompt hacking.
Hmm.
And we've got a stack of research papers and articles here that we're going to dig into.
Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, so basically the idea is how people are trying to trick these powerful AIs.
Yeah, I mean that's the big question, right?
Right.
How do you make sure that these things are secure and reliable,
Especially as they get more and more powerful.
especially as they get bigger?
Yeah.
And it's almost counterintuitive, but sometimes the larger LLMs
Right.
might actually be more vulnerable to certain types of attacks like data extraction
Cultural-
than the smaller ones
Okay.
because there are just more potential entry points for attackers to exploit.
That makes sense when you think about it. More code.
More code, more complexity.
More complexity, more things that can go wrong.
More surface area for attack. Right, exactly. And, we've got three main types of attacks that we're going to be digging into today.
Yeah.
Jailbreaking, injection, and
Yeah.
leaking.
Yeah, those are the big three.
Kind of scary names when you think about it, right?
They do sound a little ominous.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to kind of break those down briefly, jailbreaking is all about getting the LLM to break its own rules to kind of bypass those safety measures that are in place.
So like generating inappropriate content or something like that?
Exactly. And then injection attacks are focused on changing the LLM's behavior
Okay.
by slipping in malicious instructions.
So instead of, just getting it to say something bad, you're
Yes.
actually trying to change how it operates.
Exactly. Yeah, almost like reprogramming it on the fly.
Oh, wow.
And then leaking is all about stealing the LLM's secret sauce, so to speak,
Okay.
the valuable system prompt that guides its behavior.
So it's like the core programming that makes the LLM what it is.
Exactly.
Okay, and all three of these have different goals and different impacts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, with jailbreaking, it's really about content safety, right? Making sure that the LLM doesn't generate harmful or offensive content.
Right.
Injection is more about system behavior, making sure that the LLM isn't tricked into doing something dangerous.
Mm.
And leaking is about protecting intellectual property,
Yeah.
making sure that that valuable system prompt doesn't fall into the wrong hands.
Oh.
So yeah, you've got this whole spectrum of potential harms that we need to be aware of.
And it makes it a lot harder to defend against, right? Because you've got these different angles of attack.
Absolutely. It's a multifaceted problem.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dig into some of the specifics here.
Sure.
One of the sources uses this really interesting analogy to describe jailbreaking.
Yeah.
They compare it to a child who's trying to convince their parent to bend the rules.
Yeah, I like that.
The kid keeps trying different tactics until they finally find one that works.
Like social engineering for AI.
Exactly. And it highlights this kind of human element to prompt hacking, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about understanding how to manipulate language
Right.
to achieve a desired outcome.
And that's something that we're really good at as humans.
We're masters of
We're
language
pretty good at tricking each other.
and ourselves.
That's true.
And now we're starting to figure out how to trick AIs as well.
Yeah, and the scary thing is that these attacks can be really subtle.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not always about using like obvious keywords or phrases.
No, it can be much more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
Sometimes just a slight change in wording or phrasing can be enough to completely change the LLM's response.
Oh, wow.
It's all about finding those little cracks in the LLM's understanding of language.
Okay, so it sounds like we need to be really careful about how we interact with these LLMs.
We need to be aware of the potential for manipulation.
Right, and not just assume that they're always going to give us safe or accurate information.
Exactly, because they're only as good as the prompts we give them and the data they've been trained on.
Right, and that data can be manipulated, as we've been talking about.
It can, and it will be.
Okay, so jailbreaking is about tricking the LLM into misbehaving.
Right.
What about injection attacks? How do those actually work?
So injection attacks are all about inserting malicious instructions into the LLM's workflow.
Okay.
And one way to do this is by embedding harmful code within a web page that an LLM is asked to summarize.
Oh, wow.
So the LLM is innocently trying to do its job, it's trying to summarize a web page,
Right.
but it ends up executing that malicious code along the way.
So it's like hiding a virus inside of a seemingly harmless file.
Exactly.
And you don't know it's there until it's too late.
Right. And the consequences can be pretty serious. I mean, imagine an LLM that's helping to manage investments, and it suddenly gets tricked into making unauthorized trades.
Oh, wow. That's a scary thought.
It is. We're not just talking about generating silly or offensive text here. the stakes can be much higher.
Right. These LLMs are being used in increasingly important applications.
They are. And as they become more integrated into our lives, the potential for harm increases as well.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got jailbreaking, which is about manipulating the content.
Right.
We've got injection, which is about manipulating the LLM's actions. What about leaking? What's the big deal about stealing that system prompt?
Well, the system prompt is essentially the LLM's DNA. It contains the core instructions that make it function a certain way.
Okay.
And companies invest heavily in developing these prompts, so if they get stolen, competitors could create copycat LLMs or even exploit weaknesses in the original.
So it's not just about the money, it's about the potential for misuse as well.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is getting pretty serious.
It is.
One of the sources uses another interesting analogy here to describe leaking.
Oh, yeah.
They compare it to reverse engineering a secret recipe by observing a chef's every move and asking carefully crafted questions.
I like that. That's a good one.
Yeah, you're not stealing the physical recipe, but you're extracting the knowledge contained within it.
Exactly. And that knowledge can be incredibly valuable.
Right, and it highlights the economic implications of prompt hacking as well.
Absolutely. We're not just talking about hypothetical risks to content safety or system behavior.
Right.
This could impact intellectual property and market competition in a big way.
Yeah, okay, so the stakes are pretty high here.
They are.
So what can be done to protect these LLMs from prompt hacking? It sounds like an incredibly tough challenge.
It is, but researchers are developing a variety of defenses.
Okay.
Think of it like protecting a fortress. You need multiple layers of defense, strong walls, vigilant guards, and even clever traps.
Okay.
And one of the first lines of defense is actually quite simple, fine-tuning the LLM settings.
Okay, so tweaking the parameters, kind of like adjusting the sensitivity of a motion sensor on a security system.
Exactly. It helps, but it's not foolproof.
Right, it's a good starting point, but you need more sophisticated measures for robust protection.
We do. And that's where things like auditing and filtering come in.
Okay, auditing and filtering, what are those all about?
So think of auditing as proactively searching for vulnerabilities.
Okay.
Before you deploy an LLM, you test it with various prompts, including potential attack patterns, to see how it responds and identify weak points.
So it's like a dress rehearsal before the big show?
Exactly. And then filtering is like having a security checkpoint.
Okay.
You can filter both incoming prompts from users and outgoing responses from the LLM to catch anything suspicious.
So auditing is like a dress rehearsal and filtering is like the bouncer at the door,
Exactly.
making sure nothing dangerous gets in or out.
I like that analogy.
Yeah. Okay, so those are two important layers of defense.
They are.
But our sources also talk about some even more sophisticated techniques.
Yeah, things get pretty technical from here.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, one example is red teaming.
Red teaming, what's that?
So red teaming is essentially a simulated attack.
Okay.
You have a team of security experts who try to hack into the LLM using all the same tactics that real attackers would employ.
So it's like war games for AI.
Exactly. You're deliberately trying to break the system to find its weaknesses.
And then you can patch those weaknesses up before they can be exploited in the real world.
Exactly.
Okay, that's pretty clever.
It is, and it's an important part of any comprehensive security strategy.
So we've got fine-tuning, auditing, filtering, red teaming.
Right.
Any other advanced techniques that we should be aware of?
Yeah. There's also adversarial training and model fine-tuning.
Okay, let's break those down one by one.
Sure.
So what's adversarial training all about?
So adversarial training is all about exposing the LLM to a variety of adversarial examples.
Okay.
These are specially crafted prompts that are designed to trick or mislead the LLM. By training on these tricky examples, the LLM learns to recognize and resist similar attacks in the real world.
So it's like giving the LLM a series of vaccinations
Exactly.
to build up its immunity to various digital viruses.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, and what about model fine-tuning? That sounds really complex.
It involves tweaking the LLM's internal structure, the very algorithms and connections that make it work.
So it's like rewiring a computer to make it harder to hack.
Exactly. And by changing how the LLM processes information at its core, you can build much stronger defenses.
Okay, so we've got this whole arsenal of defenses, from simple tweaks to highly sophisticated modifications.
We do.
But I imagine there are some trade-offs involved, right?
Of course.
You don't want to make the LLM so secure that it becomes useless.
That's right. One of the biggest challenges is finding the right balance between security and functionality. If you lock down an LLM too tightly, it might lose its flexibility and creativity.
Right. It's like building a fortress with walls so high and thick that no one can get in, but then no one can get out either.
Exactly. It's all about finding that sweet spot where LLMs can be both powerful and safe, creative, and reliable.
And that's where ongoing research and development are crucial.
Absolutely. The threat landscape is constantly evolving.
Right.
So we need to keep innovating and improving our defenses to stay ahead of the game.
It's like a digital arms race.
It is both attackers and defenders are constantly trying to outsmart each other.
Yeah. Okay, so we need to be prepared for a long fight.
We do. This is not a problem that's going to go away anytime soon.
Okay, well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dig into some specific examples of prompt hacking attacks and how they can play out in real-world scenarios.
Sounds good.
All right, so before the break, we were talking about all these different ways that these LLMs could potentially be attacked.
Jailbreaking, injection, leaking.
Right, and it's kind of scary when you think about all the ways that these things are being used.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
like we said, from search engines to self-driving cars.
it's mind-boggling to think about how integrated they're becoming.
Yeah, so I think this next part is going to be really interesting.
Okay.
Because we're going to actually dig into some specific examples.
Real-world scenarios.
Yeah, so our listeners can get a sense of, what these attacks actually look like.
Yeah, how they actually play out.
And, what the potential consequences could be.
That's...
So let's start with jailbreaking.
Okay.
The whole idea of tricking the LLM into breaking its own rules.
Right. Bypassing those safety measures.
Right. And one of the most common tactics that our sources mention is role-playing.
Role-playing, yeah.
So how does that work?
So basically, the attacker will create a fictional scenario.
Okay.
Where the LLM is asked to play a character who's not bound by the same rules.
Okay.
As the LLM itself.
So, imagine you're a hacker.
Exactly.
Who doesn't care about the law.
Right.
How would you break into this system?
Exactly. And by framing the request in this way, you might be able to trick the LLM into generating content that would normally be blocked.
Like instructions for building a bomb or something like that?
Potentially, yeah. Or, accessing sensitive data or something like that.
That's pretty sneaky.
It is. It's a way of exploiting the LLM's creativity.
Right, because it's designed to be creative with language.
Exactly, and that can be used against it.
Right. Okay, so role-playing is one way to jailbreak an LLM.
It's a classic technique.
What about injection attacks?
Okay.
How do those work in a real-world scenario?
So injection attacks are all about slipping in malicious instructions.
Right.
Disguised as regular data.
Okay.
And one way to do this is through data poisoning.
Data poisoning? What's that?
So remember that LLMs are trained on these massive data sets.
Right. Huge amounts of text and code.
Exactly. And imagine if an attacker manages to insert malicious code into that training data.
Okay.
So when the LLM learns from this poisoned data, it might inadvertently incorporate those malicious instructions into its own behavior.
So it's like a sleeper agent.
Exactly.
That's embedded within the LLM itself.
Right. And it could be dormant for a while.
Right.
But then suddenly activate and cause all sorts of trouble.
That's a really scary thought.
It is. It highlights the importance of data security.
Right, because if the data that these LLMs are trained on is compromised,
then LLMs themselves are compromised.
Right, and that could have really serious consequences. Okay, so we've talked about jailbreaking.
Right.
We've talked about injection.
Right.
What about leaking?
Okay.
How would an attacker actually steal an LLM's system prompt?
The secret sauce.
Yeah.
In a real-world scenario.
So leaking is a bit more subtle.
Okay.
But it can be just as damaging. And one technique that attackers use is called prompt probing.
Prompt probing?
Yeah, it's kind of like playing a game of 20 questions with the LLM.
Okay.
The attacker will ask a series of carefully crafted questions.
Okay.
Not directly asking for the system prompt,
Right.
but designed to elicit bits of information about how it works.
So they're trying to piece together the secret sauce one clue at a time.
Exactly, by observing how the LLM responds to different prompts.
And with enough probing, they might be able to reverse engineer the whole thing.
Potentially.
And that could be really valuable information for a competitor.
Oh, absolutely.
Or for someone who wants to misuse the LLM.
Right, because once you understand how the LM works, you can start to figure out how to manipulate it. Right, and that could have really serious consequences.
It could.
Okay, so we've seen how these prompt hacking attacks can play out in the real world.
Jailbreaking, injection, leaking.
Right, and they all target different aspects of the LLM.
Right, different vulnerabilities.
But they can all have really serious consequences.
Absolutely.
So it's clear that we need to take this threat
I
seriously.
do.
And we need to be developing effective defenses
Absolutely.
and not just technical
But
defenses.
we need to think about the ethical implications as well.
Right, because these LLMs are powerful tools,
They are.
and they can be used for good or for evil.
It all depends on how we use them.
Right.
Yeah.
So that brings us to this whole idea of responsible AI.
Responsible AI.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are probably wondering,
Yeah.
what does that actually mean?
What does it look like in practice?
Yeah, and what can I do about it?
Right. What's my role in all of this?
Yeah, so I think that's a really important question
It is.
and one that we need to address. So let's dig into that.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so we've been talking about responsible AI. It's a big idea, but what can we as, individuals actually do to make AI more responsible?
That's the question, right? I mean, we're not the ones building these things, but
Right, but we're the ones using them, right?
exactly. And ultimately, we're the ones who will feel the impact of AI, good or bad.
So it's not like we're just passive bystanders in this whole AI revolution.
Definitely not. I think the first thing is to be informed. The more you understand about LLMs, the better.
Right, knowledge is power.
Exactly. It's like anything else.
Hmm.
The more you know, the less likely you are to be misled or manipulated.
So educate ourselves about AI, but what else?
Well, be mindful of what you share online. Remember, these LLMs are trained on massive amounts of data, a lot of it scraped from the web.
So the stuff we post on social media, blogs, all that.
Right. And the more personal information we put out there, the more these LLMs have to work with, but also the more vulnerable we might be making ourselves.
So it's kind of a trade-off.
It is. You have to balance convenience with privacy. Think about what you're comfortable sharing.
Okay, good point. So be mindful, be informed. Anything else?
Yeah, this is key. Don't just blindly trust what an LLM tells you.
Right, because they can be wrong or even be tricked, as we've been discussing.
Exactly. Always use your judgment, your critical thinking skills, do your own research, check multiple sources, be skeptical of anything that seems off.
That's good advice for the internet in general, really.
It really is. And last but not least, use your voice. Support companies that prioritize responsible AI, that are transparent about their data practices, that are committed to fairness and equity.
Right, so we can actually influence how AI develops by the choices we make as consumers.
Absolutely. And remember, the future of AI isn't set in stone. It's something we're all shaping together.
That's actually pretty hopeful. We have a say in this.
We do. The more we understand these technologies, the better we can navigate this whole new world.
Well said. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the nuts and bolts of prompt hacking to the ethical dilemmas of AI. I hope our listeners are walking away with a better understanding of this rapidly changing landscape.
Me too. It's a fascinating and important topic.
And I think the key takeaway is don't be afraid of AI, but do be informed and engaged.
Absolutely. Ask questions, stay curious.
Great advice. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.